Hi guys, I'm Miranda Larbi, the editor of Strong Women, which is Stylist's health and fitness platform. And I'm thrilled to be chairing this discussion tonight, which is going to be really informative, really motivational and insightful. We're going to be chatting all about the challenges that women face when it comes to moving more and exercising. If you've ever read Strong Women, you'll know that we are constantly trying to find out what the barriers are to women enjoying movement for their mental health, for empowerment, and just being better in every part of their lives. We have a brilliant panel of brilliant experts. So first up, we've got athlete, broadcaster, and vitality ambassador, Gabby Logan, entrepreneur, Sharmadeen Reid, Moffat, CEO of Wellness. I've made a mistake on my card. I'm so sorry. No. The Wellness HQ. Yeah. And she's also one of the UK's leading female athlete experts, and Dr. Katie Tryon, Director of Health Strategy at Vitality. Sorry about that, Baz. Right, okay, let's crack on. We've got loads of questions to get through. So just chip in as we go, but I'm going to direct each question to each of you. So this is to you, Baz, first of all. Obviously, we're here to celebrate the launch of this report, and the report has shown broad strokes that women just aren't as active as we know that they should be, and maybe they want to be. So can you explain what the key barriers you found are in preventing women from being more active?
Yeah, I think the report showed lots and lots of reasons. Some of them we all know about already, and there were some sort of new ones in there. But time, and that's such a cliche, like that comes up in every single piece of research as to why do women not do as much exercise as they would like. It's just the time restraints on women, and I think that if you look at the amount of free time we have compared to men, it's a lot less, and when it is in our day, is not at a time when any of us have any energy to be active. So time was a huge constraint. The two others that I think were highlighted to me was this, women have such low self-esteem for exercise and to be active. So this fear of judgment, of going into a place where they don't know the rules, they don't know the etiquette, they don't know kind of what's expected of them, and they also feel that everybody is going to be watching them, even though that most people who do exercise are just generally obsessed with themselves. And then there was this also, this other point about how people just felt that it wasn't, sport and exercise wasn't for them. So that's that system of sport and exercise. They might not have articulated it like that, but it just felt a place. They couldn't really say why, but it was a place where they just didn't feel the right place for them. They didn't feel like welcome in it. So I think those three things, plus many others, kind of culminated in one of the reasons why women just don't do it as much exercise. Yeah,
and we're going to be exploring each of those in more detail, aren't we? I guess we've read the report today at Stylist, and the wildest statistic that I read was that only 23% of women engage in 30 minutes of exercise or 7,000 steps a day, 5 times a week, which on paper doesn't sound that much, but obviously nearly 80% of us can't do that. So, Dr. Katie, are you shocked by that statistic?
We did some work recently on the habit index, and we found the same thing. And men and women alike were low in terms of people actually achieving those key metrics. But I think, kind of picking up on some of the things that you said, I think the really devastating thing for me in it was, one, how women don't see it as fun at all. I mean, that really killed me. When I sort of think I've got young children and everyone's running around and it's all for fun and it's all for entertainment, and then we lose that. It's no longer fun. And then I think the issue which we found with the habit index is people then also obsess about the length of time you need to exercise for, right? So a lot of the research that we've shown for your health benefits is actually every little counts. And every incremental increase you make in the amount of physical activity you do is really good for your health. So that sort of idea of having to set aside huge amounts of time for this, what is clearly considered quite a kind of onerous, tedious, boring task, has really kind of brought everyone to this point where they're just not exercising to the extent they were, that they should be. And I think if we kind of reframed it to say, actually, every little counts, it doesn't have to be this big task, it can be social, it can be fun, it doesn't have to be painful. And I think that whole piece around the focus on weight loss is the devastating piece from the research, to really see that actually the main focus has been on weight loss. And you're not going to see the results. So a lot of what we talk about in the business is around what are the incentives for doing things? What are the incentives for getting up, getting off the couch, doing some physical activity? If your incentive is to lose weight, you're not going to see it the minute you come back from a walk. And it's really, really hard if that's your focus. If your focus is ideally because it was fun, or you feel better mentally, you feel better physically, you've been out and about, then you will get that incentive, you will get that reward when you've done it. If it's all about weight loss, you're not going to see that every day. And I think that really killed me. And I think trying to think through how do we reframe it that it's fun and you get something out of it every time, not if you do this solidly for a year. I think that's what we need to kind of change in the narrative.
Yeah, I also wonder whether having those certain metrics, like you've got to get 10,000 steps a day, or you've got to do 150 minutes a week, that turns people off, because they're such huge numbers when you first hear them.
Well, I think that comes down to the personalisation piece. And I think that the report highlighted a lot, that actually people of different ages like to do different physical activity. And I think the way people engage in physical activity is very different. Some people, those metrics are a great target. They're going to get up and get going because they want to get their 10,000 steps, because actually if they're Vitality members, they're going to get points for it. And, that acts as a real incentive. Whereas for others, it can be really intimidating. And I think that was what we showed from the Habit Index. Actually, if you're only doing 2,000 steps, if you do 3,000 and make a habit out of 3,000, that is a lot better than 2,000. It sounds ridiculous, but you're right. People hook on 10,000. And so we just need to start thinking about kind of building it up. And actually, the one thing that we did show is you can't change it overnight. You might go and if you do 1,000 normally, you might do 10,000 tomorrow, but you're not going to consistently do it. You've got to build up slowly so that it's not painful, it's not unpleasant, it's, you can work it into your daily life. You need to think about it more in terms of kind of long-term habitual sustainability than, like you say, those big targets. I could run a marathon tomorrow, but I'm not going to keep doing it, am I?
Yeah. Probably a good thing.
Probably. I probably wouldn't be able to get out of bed, so there are reasons why.
Gabby, we spoke in the green room before we came into this room about guilt, and that was one of the main things that came out of the report, just how big a role guilt plays in women not prioritising their own well-being, and especially not making time to move. So how can we address the guilt that women feel? And obviously it's across most of the age groups. And what role do societal expectations play in that?
I think the first time I experienced that was after I had children, because coming from quite a high performance sporting background, I knew sport gave me a lot in my life, and doing exercise gave me a lot. So I didn't need to be convinced of that. Suddenly I had these babies to look after because I had twins, and the idea that I could spend any time on me and and my kind of well-being and looking after myself felt so indulgent. How could I possibly, even if they're asleep, ignore them sleeping, or go and do a chore? And so my husband was quite, because he comes from a sports background, and he was like, but this is the thing that makes you feel good, and you have always exercised, and you need to do it for you, and you need to get moving, go for a long walk, or do something, do some push-ups, do some squats, whatever it is that you need to do. And so he kind of convinced me that I should be doing it for our well-being. He said, trust me, all of us benefit when you exercise. This is not just you. And so I always say to people I work with, if you can give me some time to exercise and a coffee, I'll do anything for you for 18 hours. I'll do an 18-hour day. And so once I kind of got back into it and realised actually I was healthier, my immune system was stronger, I was able to be a more energetic kind of member of the family, I got through that period, but realised that it is such a debate, internal debate that women have. And as you say, it's not just that period of life. For a lot of women, it's earlier, and it comes when they lose sport, maybe after school or university, and they start work, and then you're going, well, I really want to get on with my career, and I've got to work hard. If I'm taking my focus away from that, and it's not practical for me to exercise, suddenly it's not a habit anymore. And I think that's really important as well, because the more you do something, the more you do something, right? Yeah. So whether that's a bad habit or a good habit. And so once you lose that way, I think for a lot of women, it's very hard to find your way back. So the emotional calling on exercise, if you like, I think shouldn't be underestimated, and how that can feel like a really indulgent thing, but actually it's such an important part of you being the best version of you. So somehow we have to convince women from whatever age that it is as integral as brushing your teeth, as putting your socks in the morning, as buying your vegetables, whatever it is that you feel is good for you, that has to come into the equation.
Yeah, and I guess a huge part of that is just time. Because as you say, if you've got kids to look after, that's non-negotiable. If you've got a job to go to, I guess you've got to go there. But I guess. But Baz, talking about work, where does the responsibility lie for our health and activity levels within the working week? Is it our responsibility to carve that time out, or is it our employers to give us the time?
And when we were doing this, like when the data came through and we were kind of analysing the results and looking at all the report, like we've got women in sport here as well in the room tonight that really massively contributed to this discussion. And it, we can't put it all on the women. It's like there's many discussions happening at society level, and it, very quickly when women are told it's their fault, the narrative very quickly changes into, oh, hang on a minute, like, it's not just the woman's fault. So I think that this, again, was one of those conversations when we were like, we can't just say that women are not prioritising exercise, women are demotivated to exercise, women are not finding the time. So we can absolutely be better, but we can't do it on our own, because it doesn't matter how motivated you were once you had your children, unless your husband said to you, Gabby, it's really important that you do exercise, you'd have found it really difficult to have done that in amongst all the stuff you had to do at home. So yes, women can kind of do a little bit, but I think that partners play a really key role. So in our house, like we say, we've got let's say we've got 8 exercise sessions between me and my husband a week. I want 4 of them and he wants 4 of them. It's like, so how do we make that happen? And I think having a family, having people that are supportive, it's like, okay, like how many times are you going to the gym? Oh, you go every day before work? Okay, cool. Like, well, I need to do that too. So it's making sure that we put ourselves into that conversation, and it's not the last thing that happens once we've sorted everyone else's lives out. I think workplaces are really interesting. For sure, they will say, yeah, but hang on, like we've got a free gym and we give you membership to this, and we've got, we organise a charity fun run or whatever, we might match fund your, etc., whatever it might be. If you look at the people that are taking part in those physical activity opportunities, it's unlikely to be the part-time worker, the person on compressed hours, the person that has to drop off her kids to kind of quickly come into work, missing her lunch break so she can leave early. If you said to her, yeah, but why don't you go and use a company gym? It's like, well, because I can't do that. So the workplace, we can't just provide a list of everything that we are doing. If the people that we know need to do the activity aren't taking part, that list isn't good enough. So we have to do the workplace absolutely has to do a better job. Then, in addition to that, that report said that only 4% of women take part in organised sport. So sport has to do a better job at looking after women too. And again, that's a huge challenge, because sport traditionally takes time when we are often looking after children. We might be stood on the sidelines watching children doing our sport, but it's not a time when we are doing sport.
You obviously like very successful entrepreneur and businesswoman. So maybe you can tell us if and how you incorporate exercise into your working day.
Yeah, so I think for me, because I was always played every sport as a child, and then when I moved to university, like Gabby said, I went to art school, and it was actually the first time that I went from doing something physical every single day to move into London and no sports teams, because no one at art school plays sports apparently. And it took me a while, obviously moving from Wolverhampton to London was a big change anyway, but it took me a while to kind of figure out how to reconfigure my life around this new world, and including sport. And one of the things that really interested me about the report was the various life stages that women go through, and how at each different life stage you have to accept that you are readjusting your activity levels. So normally it's like I noticed that pregnancy was a big change in the report for people's exercise levels. And now my thought process is, rather than think, okay, my whole life has changed, therefore I'm not going to do the things I love because I can no longer fit them in. I'm now like, oh, okay, so my whole life's changed. I need to adapt, and I need to figure out what works for me. So I remember when I first moved to London, I was looking for women's football teams. This is in 2003. I'm aging myself now. But there really wasn't. Hardly any, or they were like semi-professional, which is not what I wanted. I just wanted to kick a ball around once a week. After a while, I did find a few teams we played, and then the sponsorship fell through because we all know no one was sponsoring women's sport back then. Luckily, things are changing now. But it was very inconsistent. So then, for the first time in my life, I had to move to the gym. I'd always loved team sports and playing contact and team sports, so the gym was quite isolating. So then I was like, okay, I need to shift again. I need to find friends to go with. And that was an amazing routine that I had. And it's funny because prior to starting a tech company, I was a stylist and consultant. So I was running around London all the time, traveling the world all the time. I never ever thought about my physical self being quite still. The minute I started a tech company, you sat at your computer for so long. And I was like, wow, it's 9, I'm at my desk, like really early, and I'm not leaving till really late. And it's, you know, you get up and my back was hurting and all of these things. So for me, I started taking walking meetings all the time. Actually, it's fun to do as well, because you can like kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Having a meeting, let me just pop in here, let's go there, let's go there. But I decided, okay, I need to bring in physical activity into my everyday, otherwise it's not going to be good for me. Now, the weight loss thing is really interesting because for me, physical activity was, you know, it's kind of weird to say because I hate this phrase in everywhere else, but apart from this, it was an anti-aging mechanism. So I'm very big into looking after my health, my cellular health, what's going on inside. I'm very much about removing toxins, you know, keeping myself as optimum as possible. And the more you learn about, you know, cell regeneration, how your body works, all of these things, you're like, if I'm not moving, I'm actually aging my cellular, you know, forget about the weight, that's just a byproduct. I think of it as this is going to help me improve my longevity. And women already live longer than men, but we don't necessarily live longer than men with health at optimum for that last 10 years, you know, women's bone density, all of these things that happen to women. I was like, I want to be as strong. I want my muscles to stay strong as possible. I want my bone health to stay strong as possible for as long as possible. So the only way to get around that is by understanding what works for me to move my body every single day.
Yeah, gosh. I mean, that's pretty inspirational just to kind of see how you've moved through those life stages. But the cellular thing is so interesting because that's like a relatively new part of wellness that loads of us are just learning about now, like kind of within the health journalism sector. So
I think you know, I grew up Seventh-day Adventist. That's all to say that my household was very imbued with natural, healthy living and physical activity. Like I remember my grandma doing Keep Fit classes when she was a pensioner. So it's, you know, it's really interesting because I do find that active mindset is really about the people around you as well. So if you live in a house with people who like watching Netflix every day, you're going to watch Netflix every day. But if you're in a house with people who like going out and doing things, you end up doing that. So I think your environment is a really big part of it, but I just have always had a natural curiosity for what keeps me at optimum. The way I see it is my biggest disaster would be not achieving my full potential. So if I want to achieve my full potential, I need to make sure that the machine of my body is equipped enough to do that.
let's talk more kind of work life and your experience of work life. The flexible working is huge right now, but it still doesn't really accommodate for exercise during the day.
I think about the workplace and it's based on Victorian principles of factory work, and we are no longer those people. I first started thinking about redesigning the workplace in terms of childcare. So, you know, when we were venture backed, because you have loads of money to waste, I had a creche in the office because I was like, why have other people got like dry cleaners and things in their office? And then a big part of our workplace, which I really advocate for, but I can imagine would be challenging in a larger company, is we make every single employee who joins us write a guide to working with me. So it's effectively a user manual for what keeps them motivated, productive. Like I loved when you said, let me exercise and give me a coffee and I'll work for you 18 hours a day. Now, most people don't know that about themselves or have the courage to communicate it. Whereas I encourage everyone from like an intern to my co-founders to do this document, and then every Friday someone stands up and presents their document. And in the document, it's everything from my productive working hours, like you say you work 7 till 3.
Yeah.
That wouldn't suit everybody. So the fact that you're allowed, or you've chosen, or whatever it is, to work till 7 to 3, the opposite could be true for somebody else. And as long as it's communicated, to me, that's like makes a really powerful team. Now, one of the things I noticed with my team is that all the engineers love to cycle for like 6-10 miles in the morning. So none of them wanted to come to stand up at 8:30 like me, which is when I like to do the first meeting of the day. So then we just moved it, and then everyone was happier because they got their exercise in, they then came to the office, they did their meeting, and they were ready to go. So I think as an employer, it's up to you to really think, how do I get the most productive team possible? You know, it's like Jenga. You're playing Jenga with everyone's likes and dislikes. But then I think as an employee, you can be quite precocious in saying, and I write this in my book, I'm like, if you did your own user manual and you did your guide to working with me, you could slip it to your boss and just say, hey, just letting you know, this is how I like to work. Or this is how you can get the best out of me. I'm here to do the best work for you. This is a guide to me to help you get the best out of me. Because particularly with flexible working and remote working, we're not going to see each other as much. We're not going to have those water cooler moments that you learn that I really like a biscuit at 2:45 p.m. to keep me going. So here's the guide, and we're shortcutting it. So sorry, I've been talking for ages. That's a very long way of saying that. I try and encourage everyone to have a self-awareness of what keeps them going. Once they have that self-awareness, to communicate it to their manager or leader and to the whole team, so that everyone can be at their optimum.
Yeah. I feel like everyone in this room is like, I want to work for you.
No, you don't. You really don't. You know, it's fun as long as everyone's doing what they're meant to be doing. Yeah. And I think we can trust each other now. I think everyone knows that remote working, flexible working, these are facts of life.
We know that when we exercise during the day, or we're at least active, we are more productive, and we've got clearer heads, and we're able to kind of cope with the pressures of business more. So how can we get more women moving during the working day without creating extra stress? What's the solution to not being stressed out at work and still being active?
I mean, I can start with my thinking on it. I mean, I do think from an employer perspective, and you picked it up on it, and I do think this idea of not working to the mean is one of the big things that we need to kind of stamp out. Because I think, you know, we always say you are what you measure, and I think, you know, we've always encouraged kind of corporates or businesses generally to be looking and monitoring the health and the well-being of their employee population and the links to productivity, etc., that kind of entails. But you automatically revert to the mean on that. So like you say, you end up with the kind of list of facilities that you provide. The same people use those facilities. Your stats look quite good because you've got a whole bunch of people. And then you've got the complete forgotten kind of that sit on the side. So really thinking through, actually, what are the various different kind of tools and facilities that you need for those different workers, whether it's flexible workers, whether it's people working different hours, those sorts of things. And I think you are what you measure. So actually, I think taking the time to look at those different groups and measure them. I mean, a lot of big businesses won't be able to go down to the individual level, but at least to be able to kind of take those cohorts, I think, is really important. And then I think it is a bit to your point, you know, treating everyone as grown-ups, right? And actually empowering teams to manage and self-manage in terms of what works for the various different people. I think you can get to a point where you're micromanaging from the top, saying, well, you can have an extra 5 minutes here and you can have an extra 4 minutes here. And there are very few jobs nowadays where that 5 minutes makes a big difference. I mean, I get it in certain situations, you know, things need to be manned. But I mean, in a lot of cases, there is more flexibility, and there's more flexibility within teams. I do think one of the big challenges with the flexibility in teams is the women often don't speak up in terms of what their needs are. And I think your idea of actually everybody having to clearly articulate to the people that they work with what their wants, needs, desires are. And, you know, it always takes compromise. You don't get everything you want, but actually then as a team, how can you structure it appropriately so that you can get what you need out of it? And then really make sure that information bubbles up so that people do have visibility on those different cohorts and how they're doing. And I think for me, that would be That would be tip-top, but Gabby's probably got
I
a
think,
different
well,
view on it.
I work in a very different environment probably to everybody else in this room, in the sense that my working life is pretty much when everybody else has their downtime. So, you know, I'm working on Boxing Day, I'm working the day after that, I work weekends, I work evenings. So my working experience is not really relevant to that chat. But what I'm thinking when I hear you there, Katie, is actually, there aren't many working environments that are the same anyway, are there? There's corporate life if you go into the City of London and you've got banks and you've got law firms and things like that. And if you're in a law firm, you're probably working from 7 in the morning till 11 at night. Good luck on the exercise. But obviously outside, you know, let's move outside of the City of London and you look into factory life, or you look at shift workers, or you look at people who are self-employed who still can't. So I think the practicalities of work, you can look at lots of interesting and brilliant ways to encourage your workforce to work if you've got especially a small to medium-sized business. When you start looking at these behemoths that have got, you know, thousands and thousands of people working for them, to get the culture right in those workplaces, I think is your big challenge, isn't it? That you feel you work somewhere where people notice that health's important, and that those messages come through from all kinds of different areas in the business, whether that's because you provide people with the facilities to do it, but as you say, then you've got to have the desire, the want, the time, the need, but also making perhaps time for people to understand the educational piece that's involved here as well. So I think it is a real challenge to the workplace, and it's not one that I would be like to have to solve, you know, in terms of how, because I think there are lots of women outside of those working situations that we need to think about as well, because obviously there are far too few women in this study who feel exercise is part of their life. And then for me, that goes back to school, it goes back to post-school, it goes back to the kind of family experience and talking about who you're around, who you live with. And I think, you know, this, as you say, and you've all said so articulately, this is not just on women, right? This is society, this is back to education, this is sport, this is encouraging people to think of movement and exercise as being part of their everyday life. And I think when it has to be kind of shoehorned in, I think that's where it's going to eventually drop off, because it's not natural. You know, it's not something that people are feeling is this makes me feel so good, I can't imagine not doing it anymore. Yeah. That's how you want women to feel about movement, that they know they are feeling healthier, stronger, happier, and better in everything that they do. So yeah, I haven't given you an answer, just an observation on kind of how difficult I think the workplace is in terms of that management. But I think everything you've said about maturity, you know, and actually saying, you know what, we can trust each other here, and that I will work better. And I think if you've got a boss like you, then it's, you know, it's a given that that's going to happen. And hopefully there are going to be more great bosses who understand that.
Yeah.
I think, sorry, I was just going to add to this. I think things are changing massively with the workplace. It's like, you know, you said the culture in the company around health and exercise is really important. I always find that when people say, you know, large companies can't do X, Y, Z, I'm like, that's really interesting, because they managed to make us all come at 9 a.m. You know, I'm a founder, so I'm always going to be thinking the way things have been done before is irrelevant. Just because, you know, people went to the office at 9 and went to 5, things are changing all the time. And I think the structure of the urban landscape is changing, whereas, you know, I'm from Wolverhampton, I still live there, so I'm not in a London bubble at all, but like, people would go to the pub after work and sit there and drink, and now people don't, they go to the gym after work. Do you get what I'm saying? Things are changing slowly, but a big part of the report as well was physical safety out and about the area. So I think there are so many different levers that need to be pulled from, you know, all of the institutions you said, but then also the urban planners who, why are you still making roads that are poorly lit? You know, where you just don't feel safe whether you're a man or a woman. But the most important thing I think in this conversation is the guilt that you can't take time for yourself. And I think this affects women in so many different ways. And I would say part of my empowerment journey, part of my journey in becoming the woman I am, is being very selfish with my time. I would put in my calendar from 2 till 2:30 every single day, I'm meditating, do not disturb. And I even taught my son, when he would walk in, I'd be like, Mummy is meditating, so therefore you need to wait 20 more minutes. Do you get what I'm saying? And I just did not compromise. And I think One of the things that keeps me happy and content in the way I've designed my life is having no qualms whatsoever about saying, I'm doing this for me. And I think training your brain, it takes a while to do that, because you're undoing 5 millennia of guilt. Like you're undoing a lot of years of all forms of patriarchal
I think the way
guilt.
you can kind of
But you have to do it.
manage that as well, if you're looking at a family situation, is bringing them along with you on that journey as well. Because I definitely used to do that when mine were little. You know, we're going for a walk, but I'm just going to park the buggy here and I'm going to run up that hill a few times, and you're going to be at the bottom of that hill, and I'll see you soon. I can see you all the time. You're absolutely fine. But however you do it, I think that not only are you sending them a great message, because if they see you enjoying exercise when they're growing up, they think that's really normal. So I think that guilt, as you say, is a battle and a challenge for a lot of women in a lot of different ways. But I think that is one way to try and bring everybody on the journey with you.
But I also think that social element to it, right? Because actually I was talking to someone recently about it. He said, I never go for a run, because actually if I have 5 minutes spare, I'd much rather give a friend a call, meet up with a friend. I don't have time for my friends, let alone doing all the rest of it, you know. And I think that kind of idea is not just family, actually getting your friends involved in it is so important. You know, can you get them to do more physical activity? And it doesn't have to be, I keep saying, it doesn't have to be running a marathon. I mean, the thought of calling out my friends and saying, come for a quick 10K with me. I mean, there's absolutely no way any of them would. But if I said, let's just go for a walk rather than sitting down and having a coffee, actually, you know, then it becomes a more pleasurable experience, and you don't feel that kind of constant, I don't have time for friends, for family, for work, for...
They can all be one.
For guilt. They can all, you know, you can actually, I mean, you can definitely combine your family in it, and you can definitely encourage your friends, some more willingly than others, but you can definitely encourage friends.
Obviously, women still are the primary caregivers in most households, and that obviously limits the amount of time we have for exercise, the guilt that comes with leaving your children to go and do your own thing. Baz, how can workplaces, again, support women with caregiving duties to make activity more accessible?
Yeah, I think that this sort of pre and postnatal period, like when you're pregnant, when you've just had your baby, when your babies are little, is a really hard time, because many people don't even know what to do. And I think especially, I see like many sporty people in this room. For people that have been physically active and quite brilliant at their sport, it's a really difficult time to work out, like, you might not want to get back to that, but like, how do I get back to just going, I'll go for a 10K run or a 5K run, or I'll go to the gym. And so I think that, like, my background was in rowing. I was, and then, when I had my children, I just found that period so difficult. And although I was portraying to the world that everything was fine and great, actually, I really struggled physically. And even though, people would say, oh, how are you? Like, I'm okay. Actually, I needed someone to, like, really go, okay, Baz, like, actually, we need to start with your pelvic floor and then build up your core and then build, like, step by step by step by step, and have someone who was strong enough to, like, hold me to that. And I think that, so in answer to your question, it's that, like, no one is coping well at that life stage, right? It doesn't matter how they are presenting to the world, doesn't matter how much makeup they've got on, how beautiful their clothes are. Everyone is sleep deprived. Everyone is really worried about their children. Everyone is really worried about being able to not show any of that in the workplace because they're coping well. And so I think it's just, like, really saying to women at that life stage, like, okay, how can I help? I know that it's full on for you right now, because it is. And I think as soon as you say to someone, I know it must be full on, I'm sure you're not getting enough sleep, and they go, oh, they understand me. So I think that, I'm not going to come up with, like, a policy or a solution, because I think it all comes down to that human communication. And when people are, whether it's a menopausal woman who is menopausal, whether it's a woman who is in that pre and postnatal phase, they are having a tough time. And doesn't matter how they pretend to be, it's tough. And so I think we just have to kind of really, and I think, the workplace, this human element of us is coming more and more into the workplace. It used to be where we had to adapt to work. So, like, we had to show up at 9, we had to wear a uniform, we had to go to the toilet at a certain time. Like, there are still some few jobs where you have to do all that, but most aren't like that. Now the workplace is adapting to the needs of the individual, but unfortunately the female elements of us have not been able to show up, and it's not a normal conversation. So I think we all need to just get much more comfortable talking about all the female parts of, you know, girls and women.
Yeah. I mean, what you said about no one's coping, I'm obviously having a baby in 4 months, and I'm like, oh my God, what is going to happen?
You don't know. The problem is that once you've had your baby, you're like, why has no one told me any of this? And when you're in the club, you get it. But unfortunately, like, yeah, no one can prepare you. But I can tell you afterwards a few things.
I'll be
emailing
you.
That's fine.
When I had Ruben and Lois, they were about 10 days old. We'd just come back from hospital because I had this terrible situation at my birth, and I had to spend a week in hospital, which I wasn't planning. I was planning a day in hospital.
How was your exercise, to anyone on this panel, how did exercise change when you did become a mum? Like, was it a long journey to kind of, you said you might never be the same again, but like, does your motivation change once you have children? Or?
I think, like, for me, because I'd obviously come from this high performance system, and then once I'd retired from that, I kind of kept on going, but doing, you know, other stuff. And then you know, this baby comes out of you, out of a hole that isn't designed to have a baby's head coming out of it. And it takes a while. Like, you know, it takes a while. And also I think it just takes a while to find your groove. And it also takes a while, like, to kind of go, I can't, now the life logistics that go in to me going to whatever, it doesn't matter, are huge. And, you know, whereas before, say I wanted to exercise 5 times a week, however much it was, I probably had 15 options available to me. So if I woke up one morning and didn't want to do it, or for whatever reason, there was always another time. It's just you have 3 slots to go and be active, and you have to do it. And also, if you want to go and organise and do something, you have to kind of make sure that there's childcare. If the baby's then sick, it's all of that. And I think that it's just, I do a lot of work with personal trainers, like educating them on how, you know, on the female life stages. And I'm like, when a woman walks into your gym, celebrate that. Do not, even if she's 5 minutes late, 10 minutes late, do not punish her with burpees or star jumps or like, do you know how much effort it has? The fact she is in your space, that is amazing. She hasn't, all the stuff she's had to organise to get here is phenomenal. Whatever she does, doesn't matter. Like, and so I think it was, for me, it was just the amount of organisation. And I love sport. I love exercise. Like, nothing has ever stopped me doing it. Now, and I think that all of us here are like that. But actually, for the health of the nation, for the good of our businesses, for the good of the workplace, we need the next tier down to do it. So if you think of all the barriers that I was prepared to jump over and all the effort, like you, have put into being healthy, I think we're kind of few and far between. Like, I think that, you know, actually the majority of people don't do that.
Yeah. But I think it kind of, for me, I don't know, in an interesting way, I think having kids kind of moved me into a different zone.
We're only learning more and more about that now. You know, even when you said that it needs to start with pelvic floor and then this and then that, I feel like little things like the fact that your ligaments are softer, so you can't exercise in the same way. It seems like, I hope that one day these things are like common knowledge. Like, I cannot exercise during these parts, I can't do this type of exercise, during these parts of my pregnancy and after pregnancy. For me, the curve of my back was really pronounced. So actually, when I gave birth, I found that my core was like, I didn't really know how to stand for a while. And then I had these enormous milky boobs. So I was like, what am I doing? And I had to relearn how to just hold my body. That was just step 1. And then building back my nutrients. So I was deficient in certain things, just like all of these different things to understand how my body was changing week by week, because when you stop breastfeeding, there's a whole nother change, and all these things happen to you. And I feel like there's 2 books that I've read that have really structured my thinking about this. The first one's called Eve, which is 200 million years of evolution of the female body from a rat to a human. And then it's absolutely fascinating when you see how we've evolved to push a baby's head out. Yeah. It's the only thing it's designed for. And then actually it's really interesting where it's designed from. And then the second, because it evolves from a weird, anyway. And the second book is Matrescence, if anyone's read that, by Lucy Jones, which is like how your brain chemistry changes. Everything is changing, and I think having compassion for yourself at all of these different life stages is really key. Like, I had my first signs of perimenopause last summer, and I was so confused as to what was going on, because if you can't tell, I like to know. I like to be organised and in control. And I was like, what on earth is going on with my body, and why can't anybody tell me? And that's the thing that I think is the problem. Why can't anybody tell me? Why can't the average personal trainer understand how to help a woman post-pregnancy? You have to go to a specialist. Why can't your employer have read the latest research that the government's, most employers are not reading the research and reports. So I think as your body changes, having compassion for it, forgiving yourself for it, and just celebrating getting through the door, I think is a big deal.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I do wonder whether that is partly to do with the fact that, like, loads of us have been brought up to train like small men, right? That's Dr. Stacey book. Like, we do try and make ourselves as manly as possible in terms of training the same time every day during your menstrual cycle, and it kind of goes back to that, doesn't it? And this is just on the weight loss stuff that we touched on before. So one of the biggest recommendations that Vitality made in this report was that exercise and activities needs to rebrand away from weight loss. And I think we are a strictly diet culture free magazine, so we're in like a little bubble of like safety. But it was shocking to see that across every age group, that's the main motivator, and that's the main thing that's putting women off moving. So, Dr. Katie, why are we still hooked onto this idea of exercise as a weight loss tool? And why is it so damaging to getting more women moving? Because it's obviously not working.
Yeah, and I think it's so deeply ingrained, I think you were saying the grandmother doing keep fit classes, it was the Jane Fonda, right? I mean, it was, you do this and you will lose weight and you'll have a figure like Jane Fonda, and I think that's really permeated culture. And I think we've never reframed it for women. I feel like, it talked about men's five-a-side football. I always think, firstly, the men, well, certainly when I think about my husband, he is not expecting to play like a professional footballer in his 20s. He's perfectly happy to go out and knock a ball around, have a great time. Nobody is thinking about weight in that. They're thinking about it being fun, about it being social, about it probably escaping having to do bath time and bedtime. But, that's the sort of motivation for doing it. And I think we just haven't reframed it. That whole stat of 4% of women are doing sort of social sport, I think is terrifying. It's become this thing of you must run on a treadmill and you will lose weight. It cannot be fun, it cannot be enjoyable, it cannot be for you. And I think the other one that I found so shocking was the mental health piece, that actually mental health is stopping people and is the most, is the greatest benefit you can get. And I find that dichotomy just impossible to rationalise. And I think it's just really important that we reframe it. Even when we talk about it as physical activity, it's not physical activity makes it sound like something really serious. It's just going out and about and getting active, and enjoying yourself. And I think we need to reframe it, as you were saying, right from the point of children, of not breaking that cycle. I feel like, it very much talked about sort of primary school age, and it's all about fun. And, it's physical activity, and either you do it or you don't, and it may be acceptable or it may not. And that kind of then carries on into later life. It's not just run around, have a bit of fun. It doesn't have to be a marathon.
Yeah. A lot of, after the 2018 Commonwealth Games, when the England team won netball, a lot of women went back to netball who were kind of in their 30s, 40s. I've got friends who started playing netball again, and then a few of them started playing hockey again. Alex Danson's here. Started playing hockey again because they realised, actually, like you were saying, you don't have to be elite. It's nice if you are, obviously, it's great, and we love watching you win your gold medals, but actually they could go and have a great time with their friends. But of course, the access to those things is a barrier for a lot of people. Where are they? How do they find those clubs? And a couple of people I'm talking about were PE teachers, so they kind of had that, knowledge, and they were working out where to go. A group of friends and we started playing paddle this year, so we've got a little paddle club going, which none of us really do much else together socially. This is our kind of social thing. Last Friday night we had paddle drinks. My husband was like, "You've had tennis elbow for 3 months, and you're still going to paddle drinks?" I was like, "Yes, I am." But it's great because we're not there to see how many calories we're burning or to see, kind of how our glutes are going to work out at the end of this. It's just about the fun of an hour of playing sport together and doing something different. And I think that is, you know, it's obviously growing a lot, paddle, and it's easier to get into than tennis. But I think it's a really important development actually for social sport. And if you make it as accessible as it seems to be becoming, I'm not here from the Paddle Society, by the way, but I just think they're doing a really clever job of making it easy for people to play. And that's what it's got to be. It's got to be easy, hasn't it? It can't be a challenge to find your club.
Yeah, absolutely.
And not require too many people. Because I also find like hockey, I love, but to get enough women that commit to the same time, it's really hard. You know, then you sort of come back, you're really multiplying your time issue. You know, so like you say, paddle, small groups, and you can actually play.
Yeah. I'm going to say as a runner, I'm going to stand up for park run. I don't do it myself, but I know so many people that say 9 a.m. on a Saturday is in the diary every single week. And you're always going to be surrounded by other people. They all go for coffee and cake, and I think they spend more time in the cafe than on running around the track. But yeah, it's all about just freeing yourself from like those normal exercise environments, probably, isn't it?
Yeah.
Make it a fun thing.
Yeah. Okay, one amazing panel with such incredible experts. So big round of applause. Thank you, guys. And thank you all for coming. Thanks, Vitality, for facilitating this conversation. I hope that you are all leaving feeling motivated to get strength training, go to park run, do netball.